Helen Parker rolled her wheelchair toward her son's front door, the small wheels squeaking as if they also carried her shame. The Florida sun fell on her tired shoulders, but she kept pushing forward, hoping a mother's love still meant something here. When her son Mark opened the door, the irritation in his eyes stabbed her deeper than any injury she'd ever known. "Mom, you can't stay here," he said flatly, not even looking at the suitcase that held everything she had left. Helen tried to smile, but her voice trembled as she whispered, "I just need a little help, Mark." Yet even as she spoke, she already felt the truth settling in her chest like a stone. She had come to the wrong place for mercy. The cab carried her back home in silence, and Helen stared out the window as rows of perfect houses blurred into each other. Each house seemed to whisper, "Family lives here, just not yours." She replayed Mark's tone again and again, trying to understand how the boy she raised with love could speak to her like a stranger. When the driver helped her up the ramp, she thanked him with a smile she didn't feel, pretending the world hadn't just shifted beneath her. Inside, she sat alone in her dim living room, listening to the quiet that wrapped itself around her like a reminder. "I guess this is it," she whispered, wiping a tear before it fell. Tonight, loneliness felt heavier than her wheelchair. The next morning, Helen woke with a painful clarity that seemed to cut through months of confusion. Her hip ached, her bank account held just $237, and even breathing felt like an exercise she had to relearn. She wheeled herself into her late husband Robert's office, a room she'd avoided since the funeral, afraid of memories she wasn't ready to face. But today she needed answers, any answers, because she had nowhere left to go. As she opened the first drawer, old receipts and useless papers greeted her like ghosts of a life she no longer recognized. And then her hand brushed a single business card, tucked so deep she almost missed it. The card was heavy, expensive, the kind of thing rich people carried when they wanted to be taken seriously. Pinnacle Private Banking, Jonathan Mason, Senior Private Banker. On the back, in Robert's careful handwriting, were the words, "Emergency access only." Helen stared at those words for a long moment, her breath catching in her throat. "Emergency," she whispered. "If this isn't one, I don't know what is." She called a cab before fear could stop her and tucked the card into her blouse like a fragile lifeline. As she rolled through the marble lobby of the towering bank building, she felt impossibly small, an old woman in thrift store clothes surrounded by wealth she'd never known. When Mr. Mason saw her, he stood so quickly his chair slid backward, surprise and something like urgency flashing across his face. "Mrs. Parker, please come in," he said, guiding her wheelchair with genuine respect that almost made her cry. After verifying her identity, he turned his computer screen toward her, and Helen froze, unable to breathe. On the screen was her husband's name, above numbers she couldn't comprehend. The balance read, $47,362,891.42. Helen shook her head slowly, whispering, "That can't be right. Robert was just an office bookkeeper." Mr. Mason leaned forward softly and said, "Ma'am, Robert Parker was far more than you knew." Helen stared at the screen as if the numbers might rearrange themselves into something believable. Her hands trembled, and she whispered, $47 million. "Robert, what did you do?" Mr. Mason opened a thick folder, revealing investment papers, partnership contracts, and financial statements she'd never seen in her life. "Your husband built this fortune over 22 years, he explained gently, watching her reaction closely. "He left strict instructions that you were to be told only during a true emergency." Helen's throat tightened as the truth sank in. Robert had planned for this moment long before she ever knew she needed saving. And now her entire world was shifting in ways she couldn't yet understand. Mr. Mason continued turning pages while Helen tried to steady her breathing, each document revealing a version of her husband she never knew existed. He invested in medical clinics, restaurants, manufacturing partnerships, projects that grew faster than even he expected, he said with quiet pride. Helen blinked slowly, remembering how Robert insisted they clip coupons and choose store-brand groceries. "Why didn't he tell me?" she whispered, almost afraid of the answer. Mr. Mason folded his hands carefully and said, "Because he wanted your marriage to stay simple and honest. He believed money changes people." Helen felt tears gather in her eyes as she whispered, "He didn't trust the world, but he trusted me." But the next revelation struck harder than the first. Mr. Mason pulled out another document marked with Robert's handwriting, "For Helen only, if abandoned." Helen's breath caught. "Abandoned?" she repeated, barely able to form the word. Mr. Mason nodded solemnly. Your husband worried that one day your son might turn his back on you. He left instructions to protect you if that ever happened. Helen felt as if the room tilted, the truth crashing over her in a cold wave. Robert had seen something she refused to see for years. And the memory of Mark standing at his doorway, saying you can't stay here, now pierced deeper than ever. As the meeting ended, Mr. Mason's tone softened even further. Mrs. Parker, your husband left you a structured allowance, $5,000 monthly, accessible any time. But you can request much more if needed. Helen nodded slowly, still gripping the armrests of her wheelchair as if letting go might send her floating into disbelief. What am I supposed to do now? She asked quietly. Mr. Mason smiled kindly. You live, Mrs. Parker. You live however you choose. When she left the building, the sunlight felt brighter than usual, falling over her like a blessing she didn't feel ready to receive. She wasn't just returning home, she was stepping into a life Robert had quietly built for her. The cab ride home no longer felt like the journey of a broken woman, but of someone waking from a long, painful dream. Helen held Robert's folder tightly in her lap, her heart beating with a mixture of anger, grief, and gratitude. She whispered, "Why didn't you tell me, Robert? Why did you let me suffer alone?" Yet deep inside, she already knew the answer. He wanted to shield her from pressure, from greed, from people who would use her. As her house came into view, she felt a new fire settle inside her chest. For the first time since the accident, she wasn't afraid. She was ready to fight for the life Robert had left behind for her. When Helen reached her front door, she noticed how small and tired her home looked compared to the world she'd just stepped into. She rolled inside and set Robert's folder on the table like a sacred treasure. For a long moment, she simply stared at it, breathing slowly as reality settled. $47 million, she whispered again, as if saying it aloud might make it less unreal. Minutes passed before she gathered the courage to open the folder again. This time she read with intention, determined to understand the world Robert built in secret. A world that now belonged entirely to her. The deeper she read, the clearer the patterns became. Robert hadn't built a fortune for power or status. He'd built it for protection. And every note he'd left hinted at a fear he never voiced. Helen touched one line with trembling fingers. If Helen is left alone, activate full access. Alone. The word settled into her bones like frost. She remembered standing in Mark's driveway, hearing him say you can't stay here. Now the memory carried a darker meaning. He knew, she whispered, tears blurring the ink. Robert knew before I did. Her phone buzzed, shaking her from her thoughts. Mark's name appeared on the screen, and Helen hesitated before answering. "Hi, Mom," he said, sounding practiced, polite, distant. "Ashley and I talked. We think we should help you find some government programs. Maybe subsidized housing." Helen closed her eyes, letting the words land. Yesterday she would have cried. Today she only felt hollow. "That's very thoughtful, Mark," she said quietly. "I'll look into it." Mark sighed with relief, never noticing the cold tone beneath her calm voice. "Good. It's better handled by professionals anyway." After the call ended, Helen placed the phone beside Robert's papers and exhaled slowly. Her son wanted her in subsidized housing, while her husband had left her enough wealth to buy half the city. The contrast was too painful to ignore. She whispered, "You didn't even try, Mark. You didn't even ask what I needed." For years she'd excused his distance as adulthood, stress, responsibilities. But now she saw the truth clearly. Mark had only ever valued what she could give, not who she was. And Robert had known exactly how that would end. The next afternoon, a woman named Sarah Morris arrived, the case manager Mark arranged. She stepped inside with warm eyes and a stack of forms, unaware of the storm beneath Helen's calm smile. "Your son is very concerned about you," Sarah began gently. Helen almost laughed at the irony, but kept her voice steady. They discussed senior programs, government housing, and food assistance. Sarah spoke with genuine care, never knowing Helen could fund an entire senior complex with one check. When they finished, Helen said softly, "Thank you. This gives me clarity." And it did, more clarity than Sarah realized. After Sarah left, Helen returned to the folder and began studying Robert's business holdings one by one. There was a medical clinic named Parker Health, a chain of restaurants called Helen's Table, and a scholarship program quietly paying for students in need. The discovery filled her with a grief so deep she struggled to breathe. "You built all this, Robert," she whispered. "And I never knew." Yet beneath the grief, a spark flickered. If Robert trusted her with this legacy, then she needed to become the woman he believed she could be. A woman who stood tall, even if she sat in a wheelchair. The next morning, another knock came, unexpected and formal. Standing on her porch was a tall woman in a sharp suit. "Mrs. Parker? I'm Victoria Hale. I handled your husband's legal affairs." Helen's heartbeat quickened as she let her inside. Victoria set a thick briefcase on the coffee table. "Your husband left instructions for me to contact you, if certain conditions were met." Helen felt a chill. What conditions? Victoria folded her hands. Financial distress, medical crisis, or family abandonment. The words hit with brutal accuracy. Helen swallowed hard. "So, it happened." Victoria nodded. "Yes. And now his full protection activates." Victoria opened documents that explained even more of Robert's secret preparations. He had created a private foundation, a trust, and a detailed succession plan. He had planned for every scenario, including one where his own son might attempt to take advantage of Helen. "Your husband was very strategic," Victoria said calmly. "He anticipated that someone might one day try to control your finances." Helen trembled. Mark would never, but the memory of his cold dismissal yesterday said otherwise. Victoria continued, "There are legal triggers already in motion. Please prepare yourself." Then came the blow Helen never expected. "Your son, Mark, has recently contacted an elder law attorney," Victoria said quietly. "He inquired about the process for declaring a parent mentally incompetent." Helen gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. He wants control?" Victoria nodded slowly. "Not yet filed, but very close. Likely driven by financial strain." Helen felt her heart split in two, half breaking, half hardening. Robert had seen this coming. And she, blinded by hope, had never imagined her son would choose money over love. "What happens now?" she whispered. Victoria answered, "Now we prepare for his next move." Helen sat in silence after Victoria left, her living room suddenly feeling too small for the weight of truth resting on her shoulders. She stared at Robert's files, then at her phone, then at the quiet street outside her window. Everything was shifting, her past, her present, her future. If Mark decided to move against her legally, Robert's entire plan would activate, and the consequences would destroy more than finances. Slowly, Helen whispered, "I need to be ready." She straightened her back, wiped her tears, and looked at Robert's name on the folder. "You protected me. Now I need to protect myself." The next morning, Helen woke to her phone vibrating across the table. A message from Mark appeared, cheerful on the surface but tightened underneath. "Mom, Ashley, and I think it's best if we help manage your financial decisions. Things can get confusing at your age." Helen stared at the words, her heart sinking yet turning steady. Yesterday she would have apologized. Today she felt something else, clarity. She typed back with calm fingers, "Thank you, Mark. But I'm handling my affairs." She set the phone down and whispered, "I won't let you take what Robert built." Later that afternoon, Victoria called with the news Helen feared and expected. "Mrs. Parker, Mark filed the competency petition this morning," she said. Helen closed her eyes as the truth settled like cold water down her spine. "So it has begun," she whispered. Victoria's tone softened. "His filing activates every safeguard your husband created. The financial triggers are already moving." Helen imagined Mark sitting in his beautiful home, unaware of the storm he had summoned. "Let the process run," she said quietly. "Let him reveal who he truly is." And with those words, she stepped fully into Robert's plan. By early afternoon, Helen's phone rang non-stop. Calls from banks, calls from businesses, calls she ignored with steady breath. Mark's first voicemail sounded confused, the second worried, the third rising into panic. "Mom, something's wrong with my mortgage. They're saying Dad co-signed a loan? That makes no sense. Please call me." Helen listened without emotion, her fingers brushing the edge of Robert's folder. He had built every detail to protect her, and now the structure was unfolding exactly as he intended. She whispered, "You tried to take my freedom, Mark. Robert won't let you." By evening, Helen heard frantic knocking at her door. Through the window she saw Mark and Ashley, faces pale, eyes wide, fear replacing the confidence they once wore so easily. She opened the door but did not invite them inside. "Mom, please," Mark said, running a hand through his hair. "The bank wants immediate payment. The loans are being called. Our house, we might lose everything." Helen studied him with a calm he didn't recognize. "I'm sorry you're going through this," she said gently. Ashley stepped forward angrily. "Helen, fix this. Call your lawyer. You owe us that." Helen's expression didn't change. "I owe you nothing." Her words stunned them both, but Helen continued before they could speak. "I came to your home asking for help, and you sent me away like a stranger. Now you want my protection." Mark's voice cracked. "Mom, I made a mistake. I was stressed. I didn't mean for things to go this far." Helen's heart ached, but she held firm. "You tried to declare me incompetent, Mark." He swallowed hard, unable to deny it. "I thought you couldn't manage things anymore." Helen leaned forward slightly. "But really, you wanted control. And now you're learning what control costs." Mark sat down on her porch steps, the weight of consequences settling onto his shoulders. "Mom, I'm begging you. Help me fix this. I'll change. I'll do better. I swear I'll take care of you." Helen remembered standing in his driveway, hearing "You can't stay here." She let the memory strengthen her spine. "I needed you then, Mark. Not now. Not because of this." Ashley stared at Helen with frustration sharp as glass. "This is cruel." Helen shook her head slowly. "Cruel is watching your mother struggle and turning away." When Helen closed the door gently, leaving Mark and Ashley outside in stunned silence, she felt her breath shake, but not from guilt. From strength. She rolled to Robert's office and dialed Victoria. "Proceed with everything," she said, voice steady. "No delays." Victoria responded, "Understood, Mrs. Parker. The foreclosure notices and debt demands are already in motion." Helen nodded to herself. "Good. Let the consequences meet the choices." She stared at Robert's picture on the shelf, whispering, "You were right. Protecting myself starts with letting go of those who never protected me." 2 days passed, and Mark's world unraveled with brutal speed. His loans were frozen, creditors were calling, and the house no longer felt like a home, it felt like a ticking clock. He sent message after message, apologies, excuses, promises, then desperation. Helen read them but never replied. Instead, she focused on understanding Robert's businesses, his clinics, his restaurants, his foundation. For the first time in her life, she felt purpose. "I don't want revenge," she whispered to herself. "I want meaning. And Robert left me enough to build meaning for others too." On the 6th morning, Victoria arrived with final documents. "Everything is confirmed," she said. "Mark cannot meet the repayment demands. His home will be repossessed next week." Helen listened with a mixture of sorrow and acceptance. "And the purchase option?" Victoria nodded. "You can buy the house at fair market value immediately. Robert wanted you to have that choice." Helen wheeled closer to the window and stared at the sunlight across her small yard. "I'll buy it," she said at last. "But not for me." Victoria tilted her head. "Then for whom?" Helen whispered, "For people like me, the people their families abandon." When the house officially transferred into her name, Helen stood at the doorway of the place her son once called his dream. The rooms were still filled with the scent of their old life, children's toys, family photos, echoes of a family she once longed to belong to. But now the space felt different. It wasn't a symbol of Mark's success anymore. It was a second chance. She turned to Victoria and said, "Convert it into senior housing. A safe place for those left behind." And as she spoke, she felt something powerful rise inside her. Peace, purpose, and a quiet triumph Robert would have smiled at. 6 weeks later, the transformation had begun. Mark's former home no longer echoed with the comfortable routines he once took for granted. Instead, contractors moved through each room installing wheelchair ramps, safety rails, and warm lighting meant to welcome, not impress. Helen rolled through the hallway with quiet pride as Sarah, the case manager, walked beside her. "You're creating something beautiful here," Sarah said softly. Helen smiled at the thought. I'm creating what I needed when no one opened their door. And for the first time in months, the house felt alive, filled with purpose instead of pretense. By the time the first seniors arrived, carrying small bags and heavy hearts, Helen greeted each one like family. A woman named June trembled as she stepped inside. "My daughter said she doesn't have space for me," she whispered. Helen held her hand gently. "You have space here. You belong here." An older man named Ray wiped his eyes as he looked around. "Feels like a real home," he said quietly. Helen nodded, her throat tightening. That's the goal. Watching them settle into rooms that once belonged to people who shut her out felt like rewriting her own story, one peaceful moment at a time. Meanwhile, Mark's life continued collapsing in painful waves. His marriage cracked under tension until Ashley finally left, taking their children to stay with her sister. His job performance faltered, and whispers spread in the office about the man who suddenly couldn't manage his finances. He sent long messages to Helen, each one more desperate than the last. "Mom, I'm sorry. I need you. Please call me." Helen read them quietly, her heart aching but steady. She whispered to herself, "Love doesn't mean allowing harm. Sometimes distance is the only protection left." One afternoon, months after their last confrontation, Mark appeared at the senior house unannounced. His clothes hung loosely, and the confidence he once wore like armor had evaporated. He stood by the doorway watching volunteers unload supplies. Helen approached slowly, her expression calm but unreadable. "Mom," he said, voice cracking. "I lost everything." Helen nodded gently. "I know." He swallowed hard, eyes brimming. "I don't want money. I want my mother back." The sincerity in his voice wavered, fragile and unfamiliar. Helen looked at him for a long moment, seeing both the child she once carried and the man who wounded her so deeply. "Mark," she said softly, "you didn't lose everything because of me. You lost everything because you chose greed over love." He lowered his head, shame rippling across his face. "I know. And I'm ashamed. I'm trying to change." Helen's voice remained steady. "Change is possible, but trust takes time. And healing takes honesty." Mark nodded slowly, accepting the truth even though it stung. "Can I visit you sometimes?" he asked quietly. Helen replied, "Visits, not control. I can allow that." As Mark walked away, Helen felt no triumph, only a quiet release. This wasn't victory over her son. It was victory over the part of her heart that once believed she had to suffer to prove she was a good mother. When she rolled back inside, June waved at her from the dining area, and Ray offered her a slice of peach pie he'd baked. The house hummed with gentle laughter and warm conversations. Helen realized something beautiful. This place wasn't just a shelter. It was a community built from the ashes of her heartbreak. And she belonged here more than she ever belonged in Mark's world. As the seasons changed, the Parker Foundation expanded quietly but steadily. Helen's table opened 3 new locations, feeding working families for prices they could afford. Parker Health launched a free clinic day for seniors with chronic conditions. And the senior home, once Mark's proud suburban castle, became known throughout the county as a sanctuary of dignity and kindness. Journalists began calling for interviews, but Helen politely declined. "This isn't about publicity," she told Victoria. "It's about giving people what I once begged for, compassion." Still, at night when the house grew quiet, Helen sometimes found herself staring at old photographs of Robert and Mark. She missed the days when her son hugged her without hesitation, when their home felt whole. But she also understood something she never had before: love without boundaries becomes pain, and pain without boundaries becomes captivity. She whispered to Robert's picture, "I'm stronger now. You prepared me for this." And the peace that settled over her heart felt like his final embrace, gentle, steady, unbreakable. One morning, Helen rolled into the garden where several residents sat sipping tea beneath the shade. June waved her over. "Helen, look at what you built," she said, gesturing to the quiet beauty around them. Helen took a slow, full breath. "Robert built the path. I just learned how to walk it." Ray chuckled softly. "Well, you're walking it better than most people who stand on 2 legs." The group laughed, and warmth spread through Helen's chest. She realized she wasn't alone anymore. She had built a family, not by blood, but by choice. That evening, As the sun dipped low and cast a soft golden glow across the house, Helen wheeled to the front porch and watched the lights flicker on inside. Voices floated through the air, laughter, conversations, gentle footsteps, all blending into a melody of belonging. She whispered, "Thank you, Robert, for seeing the storm before I did." She looked toward the road where Mark had once stood begging for help and felt compassion, not sorrow. "And thank you, Mark," she murmured, "for teaching me that love must be brave." With the breeze brushing her cheeks, Helen smiled softly. Her story had begun with abandonment, but it ended with purpose, dignity, and a home full of hearts that finally understood her worth.